It is the final year of the 41st millennium. For 10,000 years, Cadia has stood watch over his glorious realm. 12 times has the Warmaster of Chaos attempted to breach the sanctity of the Cadian Gate. Now, Abaddon launches his final and greatest Black Crusade. After millennia of patience, planning, trial and error, the Despoiler would finally succeed where his father had failed. Whatever the cost in blood or souls, Ezekiel would see the galaxy burn once again. As the 41st millennium drew to its unhappy end, the situation looked grim for the Imperium of Man. Without even committing the bulk of his forces, the archenemy had landed several crippling blows. Nurglite flotillas were still spreading plague and pestilence across the sector, while the bodies of the Cadian leaders were still warm upon the fields of Tirok. It now fell upon the broad shoulders of General Ursakar Creed to rally the faithful and shore up the defense of mankind. And it's not like the grim darkness of the far future is the only place where monsters need slaying. Champions await your command in equally important battles in this game right here. Yes, you probably recognize it, it's our sponsor today, Raid Shadow Legends. You all know it, you all love it, at least those already playing seem pretty hooked, and it keeps on growing. The endless epic battles against powerful opponents are more numerous and tactical than ever, and right now has just become the best time to start building your squad. Because not only is this game endlessly deep, but if you join a clan you can go even further. And our clan needs you. Join kings and generals in-game so we can face the war ahead together. But that's not all. The big offer is that Raid are bringing one of the most iconic characters in gaming history into the game, and you can get him for free by just logging in. All you need to do is download Raid through our link and log in for 7 days. That's it. No codes, no tricks, just play and Ezio Auditore de Firenze is yours. Not only will you get Ezio, but you'll get a super overpowered legendary right away, Tholin Foulbeard, Venomade at level 15, and one of the best revivers, Rector Drath at level 30. So download the game now, join our clan, and get a massively powerful assassin on your side right away. Just use our QR code or link below and claim everything before the time limit runs out. After the disastrous betrayal at the Tirok Fields, Ursakar E. Creed had taken charge of the defense of Cadia. A man of outstanding military intellect, he had been warning Imperial High Command of an imminent Black Crusade for 2 years, to little avail. Now his men had hailed him as Lord General and placed him at the helm, an auspicious decision for the Emperor's faithful. Ursakar immediately ordered fresh waves of reinforcements from all 4 corners of the Imperium to come to his aid. Owing to the gravity of the situation, the Lord Castellan also undertook unpopular purges among the ranks of the Cadian forces. Any officers he distrusted, including scions of the nobility, were summarily replaced. At the same time, he supported Logan Grimnar of the Space Wolves as leader of all present Astartes forces. This position would only be nominal, as Space Marines famously valued their independence. Grimnar would receive only grudging respect from his peers, who viewed him as first among equals. Despite the still raging zombie plague and the decapitation of Cadian leadership at the Tirok Fields, Creed had managed to restore order. The Cadian Gate had recovered from the disaster astonishingly quickly by Imperial standards. Not one to lead from the back, Creed personally commanded an operation to hunt down the remnants of the traitor Volscani still on Cadia. Taking control of his faithful 8th Regiment, he brought them to battle and annihilated them to a man. This was accomplished despite unforeseen reinforcements from embedded Black Legion elements, who attempted to come to the Volscani's aid. Ursakar then made all haste to prepare the Cadian sector for the main invasion. The hammer, however, fell all too soon. In the early months of 999 M41, Abaddon entered Imperial space at the head of the largest armada ever seen since the Horus Heresy. Immediately after exiting the Eye of Terror, his massive fleet was bolstered by the Nurgle-aligned flotillas that had plagued the sector for years. Besides his ships, Abaddon also commanded the dreaded Planet Killer, as well as 2 Blackstone fortresses taken during the Gothic War. First contact was made with the forces of Chaos upon Urthwart. The planet had been struck hard by the plague of unbelief, and it was crawling with zombies, hunting down what few survivors remained. General Creed had sent a small elite unit of Kassakin to determine if the planet was salvageable. It was at this time that Abaddon's fleet emerged from the warp, making straight for Urthwart as their rallying point. The Planet Killer made its first appearance in almost a millennium and destroyed the world before the Kassakin had time to escape. Word, however, had already been sent out. The destruction of Urthwart thus marked the official beginning of the 13th Black Crusade. Unlike most of Abaddon's previous incursions, the vast majority of his forces went straight for Cadia. It was clear to General Creed and his staff that, this time, their beloved world would be the despoiler's main target. Before the traitors could reach Cadia, they would need to overcome several hurdles. The first of these was the world of Nemesis Tessera. An ice world and inquisitorial fortress to boot, this planet would be a tough nut to crack, even for the War Master. At first, the Imperials were taken by surprise. The despoiler moved quickly, advancing through the warp at speeds Imperial navigators could never match without losing their souls. Launching a massive invasion upon Nemesis Tessera, Abaddon would be astounded at Ursarkar Creed's preparedness over such a short time in command. Despite Chaos's rapid advance, and millions of heretic troops deployed on the surface, the planet held on. The world's deadly climate and the elite inquisitorial forces stationed there slew everything the War Master threw at them. After days of grueling Arctic warfare, the remaining traitors were hunted down to a man. Those who survived the bitter cold met their ends at the hands of inquisitorial Tempestus Scions, or the legendary Grey Knights guarding the world. To everyone's surprise, the Battle of Nemesis Tessera marked an early, decisive Imperial victory. Abaddon had been denied an early foothold. By then, most worlds of the Cadian sector were under heavy attack. Having foreseen this, Ursarkar Creed had opted for a defense-in-depth strategy. Rather than stopping the Black Crusade outright, he would absorb the blow and draw the enemy in, saving his strength for a counterattack. The Imperial Navy, sometimes unpredictably aided by the Eldar, was tasked with containing the enemy fleet. Slowly ceding non-vital ground, they were to wait until reinforcements from unthreatened worlds could be dispatched. Furthermore, all efforts were made to locate and ambush the planet killer before it could get too close to Cadia. This strategy saw notable successes. Thanks to Creed's planning, Imperial reinforcements arrived continuously at Belis Corona and launched counterattacks that relieved pressure across the sector. In a third stroke of luck, the planet killer itself and its escorting fleet were successfully brought to battle near the agri-world of Lorthox. While the vessel was preparing to destroy the planet, the Honor Company launched a daring void strike. Created 10,000 years ago, the Honor Company was composed of 100 Astartes of ultramarine stock, tasked with guarding the Cadian Gate. Upon that day, they performed their sacred duty with distinction. Though the planet killer survived, it was severely mauled. Furthermore, the Emperor's Angels bought enough time for the Guard, PDF, and even much of the population of Lorthox to be evacuated. Not content to live with the shame of defeat, the planet killer's captain made for the vulnerable world of Macaria and destroyed it as a consolation prize. The first months of the 13th Black Crusade had gone remarkably well for the Imperials. However, this fortune was not to last. Abaddon still held the advantage in initiative and in numbers. In response to Creed's defense in depth, Ezekiel sent waves of heretics to probe for inevitable weaknesses. Wherever he found any, he would commit his Chaos Astartes to exploit them. Through merciless attrition, the War Master stretched Creed's defenses to near breaking point, constantly inching his way closer to Cadia. Slowly but surely, Abaddon began scoring victories of his own. One such notable triumph was the capture of Sola Marietus by the remnants of the Volscani Cataphracts. Not all of that hateful regiment had been present upon Cadia for the massacre of the Tirok Fields. Now their surviving members sealed their pact with Chaos by providing the War Master with a forward operating base at the edge of the Cadian sector. Another notable Imperial disaster occurred on the prison world of St. Josmane's Hope. Aiming to curry favour with the forces of Chaos, billions of convicts held within the continent-wide prisons arose against their captors. Taking advantage of the mayhem, the Violators' warband descended upon the world. The inmates welcomed the fallen angels as liberators, presenting the severed heads of their jailers as a token of fealty. Unfortunately for the prisoners, they would soon learn they had traded a cruel master for one far worse. Sworn to Slanesh, the Violators proceeded to worship their Dark Prince with unbridled zeal. Over the course of solar days, the depraved Astartes introduced the convicts to a world of pain and desecration that mortal minds could not imagine. Hearing of the world's plight, Ursarkar Creed and his staff agreed that even the treasonous inmates did not deserve such a fate. The order for Exterminatus was thus officially given to prevent further corruption, or even a possible demon incursion. Unfortunately for the Imperium, Exterminatus-grade weapons were few and far between. Even the Adeptus Astartes or Inquisitorial forces present could not guarantee such a strike. Furthermore, neither of them were willing to risk their resources for such a limited gain. The presence of Chaos vessels above the world made any form of conventional Exterminatus extremely perilous, if not impossible. The ever-cold and logical Adeptus Mechanicus eventually presented a solution. The Red Priests of Mars examined the blessed workings of the massive prison complex and diligently found a weakness. After careful deliberation and reverent prayer to the Omnissiah, they proposed overloading the planet's generatorium. The massive aftershock that would ensue would be enough to rupture the planet's crust apart. The only way to accomplish such a feat, however, would be to send a small task force to infiltrate the planet and manually trigger the sequence. Strike Force Herald was thus created, consisting of mixed elements from brave guardsmen, Astartes, tech priests, and inquisitors, none of them expected to return. The task force was successfully deployed on the planet's surface to undergo their suicidal mission. While the remnants of St. Josmane's garrison attempted to evacuate, the strike force made straight for their goal, buying each meter with blood. By the Emperor's grace, they reached their objective and killed the planet. Every single member of Strike Force Herald perished in the cataclysm, but the world was denied to chaos, and most of the garrison withdrew successfully. Things worsened even further for the Imperium upon Lelithar. There, the voice of the Emperor took to his sermons once more with zeal. While the faithful populace of the world had bought the Loyalists some time, Imperial High Command seemed unable to deal with the voice once and for all. Ursarkar Creed's job was made even harder by the persistent interference of the Dark Angels chapter. Whenever the general concocted a plan to get rid of the voice, Supreme Grand Master Azrael would use every means at his disposal to thwart it. This maddening and seemingly inexplicable attitude was linked to the Dark Angels' secret hunt for the Fallen. Grandmaster Azrael was convinced that this mysterious voice was none other than Cypher, and would brook no interference from anyone. Naturally, this created no small amount of tension with the dogged and stubborn General Creed. The blows would keep coming. On Malin's reach, terrible warp storms raged on the unhappy planet for 3 solar days. By the time they subsided, the population had suffered immense psychic torture. Many died from the ordeal, unable to withstand such a close encounter with the Empyrean. Others went insane and hunted their fellow man to slaughter them in praise of the ruinous powers. On the 3rd day, the skies darkened, and a figure out of dark legend appeared to seal Malin's fate. Erebus, first chaplain of the Word-Bearers and grand architect of the Horus heresy, had arrived. The first heretic immediately made for the seat of the Adeptus Ministorum, upon the planet's capital. While Malin's cardinal recited desperate prayers from the Lectitio Divinitatis, Erebus violently replaced his father's old religion with his newest. The details of that day have been lost to Imperial records. The Ecclesiarchy decreed that to even speak of the atrocities Erebus committed on Malin was a blasphemy punishable by death. The only fact that historians could agree upon was that the Word-Bearers caused enough suffering to trigger a demon incursion before leaving the world to burn. Once again, the Ultramarine Honor Guard arrived on scene to salvage what they could. They had been tracking the Dark Apostle at great personal cost, only to arrive moments too late to confront him on Malin. Captain Echion had to admit defeat. Declaring the capital lost, he now had to prevent the rest of the world from falling into chaos. The entire site needed to be destroyed. Sparing a final thought for the millions of civilians and defenders still present, the Honor Company proceeded to bombard the city from orbit. The demon incursion was successfully halted, but most of the capital was annihilated in a deluge of ordnance. After the heady successes of the beginning of the war, things were now looking far more grim. Creed's best-laid plans had inevitably gone awry in the face of such overwhelming odds. The Cadian sector was burning, but was so far holding on. Unfortunately, misfortune never comes alone. While the Loyalists were busy holding the line against Abaddon's onslaught, the perfidious Xenos races plaguing mankind seized the moment. By drawing large amounts of manpower to reinforce Segmentum Obscurus, the 13th Black Crusade had massively weakened the Imperial juggernaut. Before long, Imperial Command began receiving endless reports of unprecedented surges in alien activity across the galaxy. The first, unsurprisingly, were the Orcs. The Greenskins had seen fit to redouble their attacks in the Scarus sector, at the same time as the Alpha Legion and the Night Lords were burning it to ash. The Imperial defenders now had to deal with two opposite strategic extremes, the subtlety and unpredictability of the Chaos Astartes and the brutishness of the aliens. To add to Imperial frustrations, wherever Chaos went, Necron tomb worlds would suddenly awake. Having spent aeons slumbering in their crypts, they had been roused by the sudden surge of warp activity. Though utterly opposed to anything warp-related and sworn enemies of Chaos, these Xenos were all too happy to exterminate Imperials as well. Throughout the Black Crusade, they would be a terrifying thorn in the sides of loyalists and heretics alike. Far away to the galactic east, the enterprising Tau had launched a massive campaign of their own in the Zeist sector. Bereft of much of its defenders, Segmentum Ultima was hard-pressed to resist. Before long, the Tau Empire had expanded its territory by 133%, a disaster for the realm of mankind. Even the Carrion-like Dark Eldar had been emboldened to the point of insolence. Usually one of the more timid races of the Milky Way, their way was to strike at small and isolated targets. Now, however, they were openly defying humanity when it was at its weakest. General Creed could not be everywhere at once. Each of these secondary incursions was a massive threat in its own right, and would require years of preparation, planning, and meticulous execution to repel. One can only imagine the general's relief, therefore, when help arrived to deal with at least one of them. Setting aside their pride and obsession over the voice, the Dark Angels offered to rid the Imperium of the Dark Eldar threat. By far the smallest and easiest to tackle for a chapter-sized force, their destruction would nevertheless require extreme finesse and skill. After all, bringing a Dark Eldar to battle was as difficult as trying to rehabilitate a heretic. Working in concert with the Ordo Xenos and Cadian Command, Grandmaster Azrael set a trap upon Ex-Lucan 7. The alien hunters of the Inquisition had studied the Xenos' pattern of attacks for months. Comparing them with millennia of data and collective experience from their Holy Ordo, they had deduced Lucan was the next likely target. The Dark Angels and elements from their successor chapters laid low, gambling their precious time and resources. They were soon vindicated, as an unusually massive Drukhari force emerged from a secret webway gate to attack the world's populace. Fully aware of the aliens' cowardice and elusiveness, the sons of Lionel Johnson patiently waited for them to commit to the slaughter fully. Sharing none of the restraint of their craft-world cousins, the sadistic Dark Eldar could not resist throwing themselves wholesale upon their seemingly hapless prey. Finally, the Angels struck. Launching a textbook attack worthy of the annals of the First Legion, the Dark Angels caught the aliens completely by surprise. In a shower of plasma and esoteric weaponry, they annihilated them so thoroughly that even the vile witchery of their homunculi would not be able to bring them back. What was left of them would later be finished off by the Relictors on Xerxia. Though doubtlessly small in scale, this precious victory was enough to bolster Imperial morale across the sector. It also freed up resources to allow the second stage of General Creed's defense in depth, a massive counterattack that would cripple the invaders. By now, the forces of Chaos had made significant inroads into the Cadian sector. The navy, however, had bent but not broken. They had absorbed the blow, as ordered, and forced the enemy to overextend. Lord Admiral Quarren, in particular, had distinguished himself by besting several enemy fleets, many times the size of his own. After months of desperate defense, the time had come to make use of the massive reinforcements gathered around Belis Corona. The greatest Chaos fleet since the Horus Heresy would now be met by the greatest Imperial fleet since the Gothic War. Drawing elements from across the Imperium's vast armadas, this formidable force would allow Creed's ships to rest and resupply. If successful, this massive gambit would also give the beleaguered Imperial ground forces, isolated across the sector, a fighting chance. Failure, however, would mean incalculable losses to the Imperium's naval strength, and complete void superiority for the archenemy. On both sides of the conflict, fiery sermons were launched. Commissars and Ministorum priests extolled the virtues of Ursarkar Creed, and reassured their flock of mankind's manifest destiny to rule the stars. Cadia, they remarked, was still out of the enemy's reach. God Emperor willing, it would remain so through faith, steel, and lance batteries. On the other end of the sector, dark apostles and overseers shared portents of triumph and slaughter. After 10,000 years of patience, the corpse worshippers were finally on their knees. 10 millennia of faithful service to the primordial truth would see them all rewarded. Once Cadia was breached, and the backwards gerontocracy sitting upon terror was uprooted, mankind would finally be free to reach its true potential. For the first time since the Great Heresy, an empire based on truth was within reach of the gods' faithful servants. But first, the galaxy would burn. And remember to go recruit Ezio for free right now to storm ahead in Raid Shadow Legends. Act quickly before they end the deal, with our link below. We will continue to cover the events of the Black Crusade as they unfold, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.